Hello, friends. If you are watching live, thank you for bearing with me. We were just undergoing some technical difficulties. If you are not, well, welcome. Maybe we'll cut this part out and you'll never see it. Today, we're going to be talking about the American Academy of Pediatrics and their recent statement that they came up with. They updated their breastfeeding guidelines and they basically said you can breastfeed until you're 2. They said a lot of other things I have a lot of opinions about. I have huge feelings about conversations surrounding breastfeeding, and we're going to hash them out today. My goal and my hope would be that someone would stumble upon this maybe in the future if they are looking for, they hear that's the recommendation from the American Academy of Pediatrics, who are kind of the know all people here, and maybe they would find this and just get a slightly different, I don't know, opinion. I have so many thoughts on this. I am doing this live so that I can get all of your feedback too, but I have too many opinions to include. We've been doing a lot of the group chats and I had too many opinions to bring in others. So we can maybe have this in a grouped format later if there's other opinions. Hello to everyone who is here on the live. I see tons and tons of familiar faces. We have Mama Nurse, Nurse Scott, OB Nurse Chelsea. These are all lovely humans who I have had on my live panel discussions before. Hannah Violet, hello. Anahila Pinto, hello, hello. Okay, so let's get started. So we have a poll in the chat going with, do you think healthcare providers in general push breastfeeding too much? And so far, 59% of you say no. And if I could do the math, I would be able to tell you how many of you that also means said yes. But it's too late in the day to be doing math. But so far, no is winning. I disagree with the majority of you, and we're going to talk about that today. So let's go ahead and pull up what the American Academy of Pediatrics ended up saying, and we'll kind of just discuss breastfeeding along the way. I have 2 children. I breastfed both of them. Piper until she was almost 2. Like I think we were at like 23 months. Avery until she was like a year and a half. So I think it makes, I don't want to say like it makes me an interesting person to talk about this, but I feel like usually the people who are super pro, like, let's just reel this back in, are usually people who haven't necessarily breastfed for that long. And I am not in that camp. And this is interesting. Nurse Scott says we certainly don't push breastfeeding in the ER. So that's interesting. Like, I wonder, what do you have them usually do? Do you push like formula? My hospitals that I worked in were very what they called baby friendly, which meant they were not super pro formula, especially when you were like delivering. We used formula a lot in peds in order to supplement and everything, but it was certainly recommended at birth that you at least try breastfeeding. And I guess we'll preface what's my feelings on it, and then we'll kind of go through. So, and feel free to share yours below in either a comment if you're watching it on the replay, or live if you're here, and we can discuss. We'll go through the whole guideline, but I think we have way overdone the breastfeeding conversation. Like I said, I think it's great. I breastfed both of my kids. However, I think it becomes detrimental when they start to push it so much that you feel like a complete failure in terms of like life in general. A complete failure if you are unable to do it. I had a really, really difficult time with my first. She didn't latch. I pumped exclusively for like 6 weeks, and then I was trying to feed her. And I also had horrible postpartum depression. And a lot of that was wrapped up in the fact that I felt like I was failing at everything in my life. And the only thing I was providing for her was the fact that I was feeding her with breast milk. And that was like literally the only thing that I had of value to provide. So if I stopped that, then I would have zero value as a mother. Looking back, I can very clearly see like this was a problem. Like that was not a rational line of thinking. But at the time, I really felt that. And because I had been told my entire pregnancy, I had been told all throughout my medical training, if you don't breastfeed, this is, it's a detriment to your child. They're going to have all these diseases. Like you're going to reduce their feeling about, you're going to reduce their chances of having X, Y, and Z disease. They're going to, it's better for you. It's better for them. And that was so pushed on, like I said, when I was pregnant, every environment I was in healthcare, of best is breast or breast is best, all of that, talking about it, that it was so overwhelming, the thought of stopping, that I was like, "No, I can't do that." And I thought I was kind of alone in that, until I started talking to my friends, and they said the same thing. Because I said, "If I could go back, the one thing I would change is I would have just stopped breastfeeding because it was miserable." I was pumping every 2 hours, and then I would feed it to her, and then I would sleep for 45 minutes, and I would repeat the cycle. 45 minutes was the amount of sleep that I was getting, at only. That was it. And I was horribly depressed, horribly anxious, very, very much not okay. And I would have been a much better mother to her if I had just fed her formula instead and said, "Hey, this isn't really working. My value as a mother is not wrapped up in what I'm feeding my child. Like, she's going to be fed." And even though they say, "Oh, fed is best," I feel like it's a whisper, like, "Oh, hey, fed is best," but really breast is best. If you fail at this, then do this. The hospital, we're not going to provide you with formula. It's going to be fine. And I, looking back now, just wish I had not heard any of that and said, like, okay, like, I wish it was a more even conversation. Like, hey, breastfeeding does seem to have some benefits. However, if that's not working out for you at all, I think we should equally value maternal, or anyone who is breastfeeding, their mental health. Because I have gone on through the years to have so many friends, countless patients in my office, countless patients in my office, absolutely sobbing, saying that they're failing in the postpartum period because they could not feed their baby. They were going to have to end up supplementing with formula, or like me, they weren't sleeping. And they had been told over and over and over again that breast is best. This is what's best for your baby. If you give up, this is not good. You know what I mean? And you can stop for any reason. You know what I mean? It could be because it's just not working out, because there's a latch issue, because you had to go back to work at 6 weeks, because you can't afford lactation consultants, because everything, you know what I mean? And they're in my office sobbing, just like I was, like, a few years before, saying that they feel like an absolute failure because they can't feed their baby this way. And so I am hugely passionate about this topic in a way that I think we have overdone it. Um, and that's why we're going to talk about it today. So that's my bias going into this. I understand that not everyone has that there's going to be people who are like, "Oh, that this is, it's the end all be all. It's great." I think we're going to like go little bit by it, and we can explain and kind of discuss it more. But that is how I come into it, and it was rough. Angela says, "The only way I see the recommendation being helpful is that if it actually affects laws or protection for lactating people, but the shoulds are just fuel for parental judgment." I completely agree. So what the report is, and we'll take a look at it. It says that you should be supported in breastfeeding for 2 years or longer, and then which. I mean, I get that they came out with that, and I think they were trying to say, "Hey, we should protect breastfeeding and pumping and all of that for 2 years." But so I guess that could be like the backbone of it, that they needed to come out with an official statement. But when you read through the actual like things that they're saying in the statement and the research behind it, it's incredibly judgmental. And as someone who would consume that as a young parent reading it, I would be like, "Oh, wow, like, you're really laying it on thick that I'm not doing a good job." Mel says, "There's a big difference between educating, making it okay to no longer do anything, pushing and guilting. Unfortunately, in many contexts, we seem to go to the extremes." Totally agree. I have absolutely no problem with being like, "Hey, there's a lot of benefits to breastfeeding." I'm a huge breastfeeding proponent when it works really well. Like with Piper, my second. I pretty much, since I had such a horrific experience with my first, I said I had already bought formula. It was in my house. I had told the nurses going in, because they always ask you when you go in to have a baby, they're like, "Oh, are you doing breastfeeding or bottle feeding or formula feeding?" And it was a baby friendly hospital. So if I wanted to feed her formula, I had to bring it. And they told me that ahead of time. So I brought some. And I was like, "I'm not stressing about it. If she latches and it works out, that's great. And if not, we're just going to go with some formula. Maybe we'll do a combination of both." I don't know why we don't push the combination of both more, but that's a conversation we can have later. And of course, the child, like, probably because I had done it before too, I'm sure that helps. That first kid, it's the blind leading the absolute blind. And it went fine. It was absolutely fine. I ran into a few issues. I knew how to troubleshoot them because I had had every issue in the book with my first. I had more support at work. It was a completely different experience. And so I feel like these guidelines are written by people who have only had pipers, whose experience is great. Chelsea OB nurse says, I see so many patients who wrap their success as a new mother around the ability to breastfeed. That level of pressure is not supportive of actual successful feeding. Exactly. When it becomes all you are thinking and stressing about, it's going to be harmful. And too much stress was detrimental to your milk supply. Yes. Not sleeping, not doing any of that, very detrimental to your milk supply. Not having any time to think about anything else and considering yourself a constant failure, very detrimental to you as a new parent and to that relationship with your baby. The kids need the thing that kids and babies need the most, in my opinion, is like a healthy, happy person that they're attached to. And if you are the person that they're attached to, you're their caregiver, and you are in tears all the time because you feel like you're not feeding them the right way, that's not good. There is Gleeful Me said, obviously this recommendation was made by a man. I literally thought the exact same thing. I was like, a older man wrote this who has never had ever have a child with teeth bite your boob. I cannot imagine breastfeeding until age 2. It is a totally different experience. Let me tell you, I breastfed Piper, like I said, until she was almost 2. And that was because I was so tired and exhausted that I didn't have the mental capacity to wean her. And she really only did it like for comfort. But it was miserable. Let me tell you. Things might still not have recovered. Wendy says, I'm breastfeeding now, but can only produce a limited amount. So I supplement with formula. I tried everything. And there are lots of people like this. And Wendy, you are doing a phenomenal job. I don't know why we don't push just like for people exactly like this rather than, murdering yourself to try to do it all yourself. Let's just do a little bit of both if you still want to do a little bit of both. But no, apparently it's all or nothing. OB nurse Chelsea says, yes, maternal mental health is more important than any method of feeding. Yes. D. Kelly said, do you think it's coincidental with the formula shortage? I don't think so. This research this was something that came out in June or July, and this would have been coming down the pipe for a very long time. They have these things planned out long before this formula supply would have come to issue. So no, I don't think it had directly to correlate to that. However, it's just terrible timing, and you would think they would have released in their statement that they did some kind of hey, we recognize this is already going on and you're probably stressed and feel like this is your only option. So maybe we'll be sensitive to that. Okay. So this is the American Academy of Pediatrics, the technical report, breastfeeding and the use of human milk. I will leave a link to this down below. This is, let me see, I'm going to send this link to the person helping me run my stream. That's my sister. I think you all know that. Okay, Rachel, there's the link. It's in there. But this report, breastfeeding of human milk, are normative standards for, so they just come right out. Breastfeeding and human milk are the normative standards for infant feeding and nutrition. So we're just going to start out with a bang and say that breastfeeding human milk is the normal way to feed an infant, which immediately, what they're trying to say, I think, is, that, the whole, hey, this is the food that is made for your baby, but the way it comes out and says is this is odd if you choose formula and it's not normal. You never want to tell people, especially new parents, that what they're doing is not normal. They don't react to it very well. It's very rude. The short and long-term medical and neurodevelopmental advantages of breastfeeding make breastfeeding or the provision of human milk a public health imperative. So not only are they immediately coming out and saying, hey, you're abnormal if you feed formula for any reason, but you are actually a damage to public health, which is a bold statement. This is listed. My sister did link the publication if you would like to read along in the link below. And OB nurse Chelsea, absolutely. This was them absolutely not reading the room. Absolutely. Let me see. And she pointed out, unfortunately, there are more people in the birth community that aren't women to push this. So there's a lot of people that are in publishing. There are more people in the birth community that are publishing this. So let's see. I wonder if this was written by a dude. Joanne, Alex. like Lawrence. I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell from names, but yeah. And yes, Nurse Scott, I completely agree. Normal is a dangerous term. I don't just a fun fact if you are in healthcare, even if you're not, don't ever chart normal because normal implies you have to explain normal. Don't just say normal. Don't say normal vital signs. You know, explain the vital signs, explain the situation. Normal implies abnormal, and as we see in this situation, can be quite awful. So far we've learned if you feed with formula, you are a public health nuisance and abnormal. That's super solid. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends exclusive breastfeeding for approximately 6 months after birth. Furthermore, the AAP supports continued breastfeeding along with appropriate complementary foods introduced at 6 months, as long as mutually desired by the mother and child for 2 years or beyond. These recommendations are consistent with the World Health Organization. So then it's going on to say, hey, you should breastfeed. You should do it for 6 months. At 6 months, you should introduce other food and you should continue until they're like 2. As other people have pointed out, breastfeeding children is, well, it's difficult. It's very painful also, especially in the beginning. People who say it's not painful, if it hurts, you're doing it wrong. That's a lie. It's abnormal. I will say this, not for everyone. Maybe other people have been doing this to you, and that's you do you. Most people have not had people chomping down on their nips for like 12 hours or more a day. Like I said, you do you, my friend, if you're used to that. But most people's are not used to that. And that is uncomfortable in the best of times. In the worst of times, if their latch is wrong, then it's like a really, really, really bad time. And it hurts. When they get teeth, things are even more interesting and awful. So I just need to throw that out there that like you are asking a lot of someone. And most of the time, the people who are breastfeeding are the ones that also were just growing this thing for like 10 months. And it was probably also not a super great time. So overall, to just recommend that, hey, your body has kind of been doing this thing for like you totally gave it over for 10 months. And now we are going to sacrifice your nipples for like 2 years. That's a lot to take in. Okay. So we should maybe just say, like, hey, this would work. But I would love to see them also say, and if you don't want to do that because you want your body back, that's totally fine. But they're not taking that route. But then they really go in for the kill here. So you might be thinking, okay, well, what if I have, obviously it doesn't matter if I just don't want to do this because we're not paying attention to that today. But what if I have a medical contraindication? Is that a valid excuse? No, because it says the medical contraindications to breastfeeding are rare. You're rare. You don't count. So, don't be coming into my office saying that you can't breastfeed because you have a medical complication. That's not very valid, and there's very few of those. So go away. That's them. I'm talking as them, as Joanne and Lawrence, in case you can't tell. The AAP recommends that birth centers or hospitals implement maternity care practices shown to improve breastfeeding initiation, duration, and exclusivity. Now, I have no problem with having that golden hour after they're born, putting them right on your chest, having them try to latch, having the hospital be super supportive, having lactation consultants come around. I have absolutely no problem with promoting breastfeeding, right? But if it's shoved down your face and done in like the baby, like, whatever baby friendly hospital ways where they don't even where they inherently shame you for formula by being like, oh, well, if you're not going to breastfeed, like you have to bring your own and you have to like that's the abnormal. That's where I have problems. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Joint Commission monitor breastfeeding practices in the United States. Pediatricians play a critical role in hospitals, their practices, and communities as advocates for breastfeeding and thus need to be trained about the benefits of breastfeeding for mothers and children in managing breastfeeding. So this I am curious about if any of you particularly have gone through the medical track, what it is like when you're taught about this, because I have had pediatricians, the response is always, so when you go in afterwards, after you have the baby, you go in for your first pediatrician appointment, at least in my experience, you go in and they're like, oh, what's baby eating? And you're like, oh, I'm breastfeeding or blah, blah. And their immediate response is usually good. Oh, good. Good. As if like, what if I had said formula and then what would you be like? They were like, oh, I'm so glad you're breastfeeding. That was always the reaction. But then it just got like kind of weird the longer you did it. So maybe they're trying to counteract that weirdness, because usually if it was like 18 months, then they're like, oh, what kind of milk does she drink? I'm like, oh, she's actually still breastfeeding. Then they'd be like, oh. So I wonder, like, their goal in this article might have been to like make it more normal that, like, hey, in a lot of the world, people do breastfeed their little ones for a lot longer. Maybe we'll just be more supportive of that choice. So maybe I'm really trying to give them the benefit of the doubt here, that that's what they were looking at this through the lens of they just wanted to help people learn that it was more normalized, but I'm not getting there because it's pretty awful. Efforts to improve breastfeeding rates must acknowledge existing disparities and impact of racism in promoting equity in breastfeeding education, support, and services. And this, we've seen, there's a big disparity of people, particularly Black people, who are breastfeeding initially, and then out, they measure it at like 6 months and then a year. And then it goes on to say, there's a lot of differences in resources at the hospital. A lot of this obviously is based on, do you have access to a lactation consultant? Did your mom breastfeed? Does your community breastfeed? Is this something that is encouraged in your, like, the people that surround you, that's going to have a huge impact on you? Does your employer, how quickly are you going back to work? Does your employer support it? Are you working in a job that is going to allow you to pump? Because if you do not pump while you are away from baby, you are not going to have enough milk, right? And so I'm glad that they brought it up, that this is a problem. Like, we see different rates of breastfeedings in different communities, but I feel like they kind of brought it up in a way that was a little bit like, hey, your group, get your act together, group. Okay. We really need you to step it up and fix this, which is never the way to do it. Usually the way we do that is not by calling people out. We're more like, hey, let's see what we can do to provide resources. If that group is even like, are you even interested? I hate that the assumption is that everyone is going to be breastfeeding, and that we're just like, I just wish it was a more clear-cut option. So this goes on and it talks about let me see if this one article, I feel like I read through this and it was just, oh, okay. Since the publication of the 2012 policy, American Academy of Pediatrics, those weren't words. I'm sorry. Since the publication of the 2012 policy statement of the American Academy of Pediatrics on breastfeeding and the use of human milk, research and systemic reviews have continued to reinforce the conclusion that breastfeeding and human milk are the normative standards for infant feeding and nutrition. Again, why are we calling it normative? Implying anything else is abnormal when many, many, many people use formula. More than 80% of women initiate breastfeeding in the United States. Both federal and state laws protect a woman's right to breastfeed, as well as the right to breastfeed in public and to continue to breastfeed or express milk in the workplace. So more than 80% initiate. A lot of that is because in the hospital, they kind of make you feel like an absolute jerk if you don't do it. And then those numbers sharply drop off when they're like, wow, this is very painful. I don't really want to be doing this. I don't want to have to pump all the time when I'm away from baby. I don't want to be the one waking up all the time in the middle of the night because my partner, their boobs do not work the way they should and they're not making the milk. This is awful, and they, like, I've always told people who did want to breastfeed, because if you want to do it, I'm all about it. Like I obviously, I would tell people, you just have to get to that like 6 to 8 week mark. And then it actually then it gets like a little bit easier. You don't have to carry around formula. There are benefits, of like, you are just a constant bottle, like baby's mad, boob, like boob solves everything is kind of the motto of my life when I had infants. And, so there are benefits. And I would tell people who needed to hear that, like, hey, if we can get you to the 6 to 8 week mark, we're going to be fine. But the 6 to 8 weeks are really brutal. They also happen to coincide with you just expelling a human, getting to meet your new human, adjusting your entire life. You're not sleeping. So like those 6 to 8 weeks, it's a rough time to be learning this new life skill. Anyway, my tangent. With most women choosing to initiate breastfeeding, I also thought it was just interesting that they chose that they're very much gendered in their language in this, which I know is becoming something that we're like, most people are like going away from using gendered terms with like, why couldn't you just say with most people choosing to initiate? Just something interesting I saw. With most women choosing to initiate breastfeeding, breastfeeding has been established as the cultural norm in the United States. I would not say that breastfeeding is a cultural norm in most of the United States. I would say, like, yes, it's more accepted. And I think that's, but I think a lot of people end up not doing it because we don't support people very well with everyone going back to work. I mean, people in, it's odd, that we have to pump. I've talked to people who are from other countries and they're like, what is a breast pump? Like, what? I'm like, yeah, yeah. We kind of treat ourselves like cows and hook ourselves up to those things. Furthermore, breastfeeding or the provision of human milk should be considered the reference standard to which all forms of infant feeding are compared to from a biological, medical, and scientific standpoint. So, I mean, I guess that makes sense. You're trying to emulate that. So, okay, but couldn't we say it nicer? When comparing breastfeeding to other forms of infant feeding, breastfeeding should be considered we talked about that. They talk about the risk, for example, in epidemiologic research, the reference standard is set at an odds ratio of a relative risk of 1, whereas other exposures or other feeding methods are presented. Okay, so they're saying breastfeeding is the comparison. If you're doing studies of how safe is this, how much do the babies grow, blah, 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 it'll always be compared to breast milk, which, sure, that's fine. For example, so we did that. Another application of the normative standard is the infant growth patterns for exclusively breastfed infants. The reference, so they're going to use growth charts based on breastfed infants, essentially. The technical, which come back one day for a rant about growth charts, developmental milestones, AAP, I am coming after you. Those are longstanding problems that we've had, the AAP and I. They do a lot of good work, but this is not it. The technical report updates the evidence for accompanying the 2022 AAP policy statement, breastfeeding and the use of human milk, and serves as a reference for other policies and publication that address breastfeeding and human nutrition. So basically, they're going to send out a bunch of pamphlets and use it to tell people that they're not normal if they don't breastfeed. Talks about the CDC collected all this data. They give you this nice chart about the healthy people is like I think it's through the World Health Organization, where you just stay like, hey, by this day, in the future, we want to have these goals so that our country is healthier. We never meet them. We always fail. I don't know why we do it, but they do. Their goals were to increase the proportion of infants who are breastfed ever, increase the proportion of infants who are breastfed at 6 months all the way down. They want to reduce the proportion of breastfed newborns who received formula supplementation within the first 2 days of life. Because, why would we offer that exhausted parent who just shoved out a baby a nap where they gave their baby formula? That'd be weird. I asked for that with Piper. I was like, can you just take her? And I'm just like, breastfeeding was going fine, but I was like, I just need to sleep. And he said, no. They were like, no, everything's going fine. We don't carry formula here. I was like, I have formula. They're like, you really should. If you're breastfeeding, you need to do that. I was like, I really need a nap. Please. Increase the proportion of infants who are breastfeeding through 3 months. So on and on. It basically just tells you what we should be doing. It goes on. The national average breastfeeding initiation is 838 or 83.9. This figure represents any breastfeeding, not exclusively breastfeeding. So it's basically then saying that we're not meeting any of our goals. We're at the 6-month rate, whatever. Furthermore, 19.4% of breastfed infants receive supplements of commercial infant formula in the first 48 hours after birth, well above the healthy people target of 14.2. So we're really failing there. How dare you, evil hospitals, try to give people a nap and give their baby formula? Or Avery had to have formula at birth because her blood sugar was critically low and the child could not eat. She could not, for the life of her, figure out the suck swallow thing and had to put a little tube down there and give her a little bit of food. So, she didn't go and have a hypoglycemic seizure. And then basically just this whole article here is just, this part's just shaming people and being like, we didn't make it. Unfortunately, 60% of mothers in the United States report they do not breastfeed as long as they intended to, citing issues with latch, the infant's weight, or concerns about medications. Because how dare that person want to go back on medicine that's not approved for breastfeeding? How dare they? Do we test a lot of medication for breastfeeding very well? No. So then we just say, oh, that's not really tested, so you can't really take it. I have tons of patients Things that you can't really take while you're breastfeeding are a lot of your psych meds, just a lot of meds in general, a lot of the good cough and cold medicines. But psych meds are the number one reason. So you have someone who has pretty debilitating anxiety and depression coming in with worsening in the postpartum period because now they're not sleeping, there's new stress, and they can't go back on their medicine, but they feel like if they stop breastfeeding, since breastfeeding is the norm, then and they go back on their medicine to help them, rebalance out their mental health, then they're bad and they're abnormal and they're contributing to these terrible statistics. So good job, AAP. Way to go. Way to go. Glad you're sticking up for those children whose parents are miserable. Alternatively, women who are supported in breastfeeding are 2.5 times more likely to exclusively breastfeed for 6 months. I do believe that support is important. Equally important. And like I said, I'm not like raging against breastfeeding. I am all for it if it is working for you. And I think we do need a lot more help in terms of, we need more lactation consultants. We need easier access to lactation consultants. With Avery, the lactation consultant it was like $25 or whatever, because my insurance covered it. With Piper, it was going to be a lot more than that. And therefore, it's something that is typically only given to you if you can afford to have that lactation consultant come. Someone visits you in the hospital. You don't know what you're doing in the hospital. You're there for like a day, maybe two. Like your milk hasn't even come in yet. No, nothing. Like, why do they visit you in the hospital? But you need to have that at like those appointments when you're going back in, like have them at your pediatrician's office, have them with your midwife group or your OBGYN group to come out and maybe come, I know, shocking, like come to your house or something where you're like comfortable, or have a time when you can really work together, and like figure this out. We do not support people enough. Maybe we could pass also like things to have better maternity leave so that we're not leaving as soon as we sort of are trying to figure this out, or we aren't stressed about having to go back to work. Or we could try to pass things through the Senate, like the Breastfeeding the Pump Act that just failed to go through the Senate. Literally, they were just saying like, hey, a lot of jobs with the Pump Act, they were trying to get an act passed to say, hey, you you have to let people pump. You have to give them a safe space, even if you're in an industry where it's inconvenient. So this was targeting mostly like teachers, people in the transportation industry, nurses, like it covered like 9 million people that technically your job would give you time to pump, but it wasn't necessarily paid, or then it counted as like your break, like all sorts of loopholes. Like when I pumped, it was always my break. I never got a break. The first time I ever actually took a break as a nurse was when I was pumping, because you couldn't do that on the floor. But maybe if we had passed that and like let people have like pump, but no, this was the great thing. They did not pass that through the Senate because people argued that it would be detrimental to businesses. So I was like, oh my gosh, let's talk more about people who are not affected making laws. Shall we? So anyway, yes, I do believe we need more support of it. But again, that's not what makes me cranky about this. And they agree. So this I like. Alternatively, this support breastfeeding support could include maternal care practices that support breastfeeding, home visits, healthcare education, peer support through special supplemental program for nutrition or infants, children, WIC. I'll just say WIC. So that's that. And I'm pretty sure the rest of this just kind of goes through. This is saying the part where it was saying about like, hey, depending on, overall, we're going to compare, Asian people, way to go. You're doing great. Hispanic people, I think you're tied with Hispanic, Latino, non-Hispanic, white populations were second. And then it just goes on to shame Black mothers and say that, hey, you could do a lot better. Where did it say? Among mothers with low American population. We're at 85.3 white people and Hispanic people. And then it went and said, but for non-Hispanic, Black, or African American populations, the initiation rates were 75.5. They were not happy with this. They went on to say they were not pleased. These disparities in breastfeeding practices reflect different populations as well as social determinants of health and hospital practices, but also represent a significant inequity issue that has disproportionately impacted non-Hispanic Black population. Implicit bias, structural bias, and structural racism should be addressed to eliminate these disparities in breastfeeding, improve health and well-being of children and families. So good. But they did not provide any explanations. Like previously, they gave explanations. They're like, hey, maybe if we, implemented more WIC, if we, supported moms more, supported anyone that's breastfeeding, if we did X, Y, and Z and provided home visits and we'd be fine. And then we get down here and they're like, well, we should probably just be better at supporting people. So very not helpful. And then it just goes on. So basically what they have come here and said is that you're not normal. They do want to extend it to 12 years. 12 years. It feels like 12 years. The AAP supports continued breastfeeding exclusively for 6 months and as long as mutually desired by mother and child for 2 years or beyond. This recommendation is consistent with the guidelines for the WHO, AAFP, and the Canadian Pediatric Society. I don't know why we need to studies emphasize the importance of nutrition during the first 1,000 days, the period from conception to 2 years of age, on a child's neurodevelopment and lifelong health. This is the most active period of neurologic development. Child, adult, and health risks, including obesity, hypertension, and diabetes, are believed to be programmed during this period. So it's okay. You don't need to breastfeed them in the entire year, 2 years. But if you don't, you're basically raising them, you're ruining their brain, their neurologic development during this time. So you just take that and do what you will with it. I'm sure the formula or the milk you're getting at the grocery store is fine. It's fine. It's not normal, but I guess it's going to be fine. In addition, studies have documented the importance of longer breastfeeding and increasing maternal attachment. I promise you, having someone bite your nipple is not the way to get attached to them. I promise. I can tell you I was done. That child still wanted to nurse and I was done. They did a study, found that longer breastfeeding duration up to age 3 predicted increase in observed maternal sensitivity. For example, maternal responsiveness to infant, affect, flexibility, and ability to read the infant's cues up to age 11 in children. So if you also don't do extended breastfeeding, then your child won't be attached to you. So super solid. So are we getting the theme? And then it gives you all the conditions. All the conditions that if you don't breastfeed your child, that you can give them. You can, and you have a less chance of getting endometrial, ovarian cancer, breast cancer, because when you're breastfeeding, your estrogen levels are lower. So, but that's only if you're breastfeeding around the clock. Okay. If you're not breastfeeding around the clock, be careful because then that estrogen can creep back in, and that is a no-no. We don't want that. Okay. So that's actually how it works with contraception too. Just in case we're going to go on a side tangent. When you're breastfeeding, you have to be breastfeeding around the clock in order to get the birth control part. Okay. So as soon as you're not breastfeeding through the night, you can get pregnant again. Okay. So just keep that in mind. Thought we'd throw that out there. Bearded Apostle, Kiwi Thinker. Thank you so much for the super chat. Hi, Liz. How do I reach out to you for a future YouTube project? You can email me here. Yes, LizYouTube@gmail.com. I just wrote it in the chat. But thank you for the super chat. And yes, let me know. Send me an email and title it something about a YouTube collaboration because I'm really bad at answering my emails, but I do try to answer those. And Marie McNamara saying, my words. Thank you so much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. I'm an IBCLC, which is an International Board Certified Lactation Consultant, and heard that the main reason AAP changed their recommendation was to align with the World Health Organization, which is WHO. I do not shame mothers. I am very glad about that. Like I said, I get why they changed it. I just don't like how they phrased it. I'm fine with them. I even wish they had just come out with a policy statement in reaction to all of the policies that are being voted on right now about there's one, I know we had the Pump Act. There's another one. Let me see if I can find what they were calling it because they were going to switch the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act is also going to be covering it. I wish they had just come out with a statement that targeted that. You know what I mean? That said, hey, we actually really support breastfeeding if that is something that is working for people. And up to age 2, it can be super beneficial. That's all you needed to say. all that people needed to say, rather than being like, hey, things are not normative. Yikes. But so yes, I totally understand why. I think I'm right and they're wrong. Obviously. That's why we're here today. I had a lot of feelings. I think that's pretty much the highlights of the article. It says a lot more of the same of, hey, you should do this for 2 years. If you want to breastfeed for 2 years, obviously that's great. I think a lot of people, it's much more normal to breastfeed for extended periods in other parts of the world. I'm all about it. I think we should have more legislation that supports people who would like to breastfeed for longer. I think we need more support for people. I think it needs to be something that is also just given a very big choice where you say, hey, there is absolutely no shame if this is absolutely not for you. If you're already overwhelmed, it's totally fine. Chad Rumsey, this gives me life. I'm a CNM, a certified nurse midwife, and I hate baby friendly. Yes. Chad, you and I can be friends. We can be friends. The midwife I went to with Avery also, she just hated it. They were in the process of switching over to baby friendly and she hated it. She's like, this is the breastfeeding police. It really does feel like that. Amanda Forrester said, coming in to this late, but I just have to say, what about the working class mothers who just couldn't get the 2 years off of work or the time to pump for that long? Exactly. When I had Avery, I went back to clinical. I think she was 5 days old, or maybe school made me go back at 4 days. I think I went back to clinical, I think at 6 or 7 days post baby, but I had to go back. The school made me come back and take an exam. She was 4 days old. They wanted me to come back and take a skills lab when I was 3 days postpartum, but my midwife lied and said, no, we were in the hospital for 3 days. I was there at 4. I was taking a test. You're like, this doesn't matter, Liz. This doesn't matter. I took a test 4 days after I had her because my midwife lied and said that we were in the hospital for 4 days when really it was 3. I think. I don't even remember. They had to lie for me and say that I didn't have to go home. So why don't we spend time legislating things like that instead of this? Kelly, let me see. Kelly Trisetter said, what is Oh, good. People answered it. What is EBF? EBF is the acronym for exclusive breastfeeding. Google Trolect said, I got my period exclusively breastfeeding at 6 weeks postpartum, and she was waking to feed in the middle of the night. Oh, this can absolutely, this has absolutely happened to me. Both of mine, I got my period at 6 or 7 weeks, which was very rude because they both woke up and ate all night for many, many months. And it was the absolute worst. Nurse Scott said, I love your guts, but my honest opinion, your reaction sounds very related to your past bad experiences. Again, I'm sorry that happened to you. Absolutely. So that's why I prefaced this with my horrible past experiences. But I've also seen this so much with my patients. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, because I feel like we really push this on people, and we can just like tone it back, because I don't know, maybe people who write these things have just forgotten what it's like to have newborns or haven't seen a lot of it when it doesn't go well, or are written by people who will never do this. Like, I definitely have a negative connotation around it, but a lot of my patients have too. So that's why I feel the way I have the feels. How do I stop and pull? But I completely acknowledge that I have a pretty huge bias coming into this. Let me see. I'm going to go back and find, Bela Rubin said, why do they call it baby friendly? Is it not mom friendly? It's definitely not baby friendly. Exactly. And that's my whole point. You should have a choice with what you want to do with your body when you're deciding, how do I want to feed this kid? That a girl. And if you don't want to, if it's going to be harmful to your mental health, and people will say to the end of time, it's not shaming. Oh, we're not trying to shame you. Fed is best. But I am telling you, as someone who has done this and who has seen it countless times, the fed is best is the minority. And it is the minority. It is not, it is like a whispered afterthought. Well, like, oh, well, I mean, I guess don't let them starve. But yeah, I have no idea who came up with baby friendly. Someone who was on this team, maybe Lawrence or whoever wrote this article. Samuel Meow said, I am glad I'm still breastfeeding. Many people were shaming me. I'm trying to wean my son off, but it's not easy for sure. And at the same time, like, I don't think we should shame people for continuing to breastfeed. Like, that is just as annoying. It's totally like fine until they're one. And then all of a sudden when they're not doing it anymore, like I got a lot of random comments, even from my pediatrician of, when I was breastfeeding, especially Piper, as she was nearing 2, and they were like, oh, she can't go to college while she's still nursing. And it was like, oh my gosh, like she is a baby. So I totally see that we need to have the conversation. They just didn't run it past me and see if I liked how they said it. And I don't like how they said it. I don't like it. Let me see. OB Nurse Tulsi said, and then after you're done, when you're 4 hours postpartum and ready to crash, we'll tell you it's time to breastfeed your baby. And it's the second feeding, even though you're exhausted. Exactly. And also don't fall asleep. Oh yeah. And also don't fall asleep while holding your baby or nursing while you're exhausted. And then after you're done feeding your baby, you need to, which only you can do because you got the boobs, you need to sit upright with them, especially if they have GERD, any kind of like spitty up stuff so that they don't choke on it. Because you don't, that would be bad too. So then you need to let them chomp on your nipples in the middle of the night, all night, every night. And then they're going to cluster feed. Cluster feeding is when they're just like on there all the time, helping your milk supply come in, or that they just need the comfort. And then you have to hold them upright, but don't you dare fall asleep. Don't you dare fall asleep. Don't you let them sleep in your bed. Don't you do that. Don't you let them sleep in your bed. Don't you do anything that'll make your life easier. And also, we don't have an open nursery anymore, so you have to keep your baby in your room the whole time, even when it's fussy, full, and you're exhausted. Yes, I asked with both of my children. I was like, can I give this back to you for just a moment? And they said no. Joe was like, what do you mean? They said no. Nurse Scott said, looks like one author is female, Dr. Meek, while the other is male, Dr. Noble. Okay, so I'm going to try not to be like Dr. Noble. Be quiet, because obviously, dudes, you can have opinions on this topic, but I feel like you came a little bit hard with this one, and you're wrong. Mel said, oh my gosh, I hadn't looked at it yet. The language is terrible. It really is. The sentiment might not be terrible, but the language that they used is bad. So this is why I wanted people to come across. I'm like, oh, here, I hope people Google this, and when they figure it out, they're like, not like, oh my gosh. Mama Nurse says, I always remembered hearing breastfed until at least 18 months. Wow, that's shocking. They supplied formula when I delivered, if that was my choice. See, that's nice. Why don't we just give people the option? A combination of breastfeeding and formula feeding would save so many new moms the headache and guilt. Mary Kay and Dell, exactly. I really love that option. I wish we did that more. But Sophia, hello, welcome. Thanks for being a channel member. I appreciate you. I think, did I go back? Did we get most things? Chad sums it up very well. Breastfeeding, awesome. Bottle feeding, awesome. Forcing it, not awesome. 3 thumbs down. Totally agree. Google lactation consultants are not covered by the provincial health system here in Ontario. So you're supposed to teach yourself, YouTube. Just YouTube your way through breastfeeding. What's the worst that can happen? They might bleed, they might crack, but it's natural. It's the best way. You keep going. Some insurances will cover it, some will not. Postpartum nurses will shame you for not breastfeeding, but then lose their minds when you ask them to help you breastfeed. Not always easy or natural for some moms. Exactly. I had this experience, and I felt really bad when I worked in peds. When I worked postpartum, one of my nurses had kids and knew how to help. That was helpful. Some of the other ones did not. And it was like that. They're like, oh, you're not going to breastfeed? I'm like, well, I don't really know how. And they were like, well, we'll get you the lactation consultant. I was like, oh, great. When are they here? And they're like, well, when can they come in? And they were like, well, tomorrow, I think she comes in at 2. I was like, oh, well, there's a lot of hours between now and tomorrow. So what are we going to do? Literally looked it up on the YouTube. I was like, Google how to breastfeed. And it was when you knew how to teach people how to breastfeed, it was like, we used to say it was like the terrible skill that, because then in peds, everyone would ask you all the time, because we worked with a lot of babies, and they got kicked up to our floor. And lactation consultants, there's like one for the whole hospital, and you can't be like, hey, good luck. And so the people kind of figured out who had breastfeeding experience and who had like horrible breastfeeding experience, so they know how to like troubleshoot things. And you quickly got a reputation of, oh, hang on, let me go find Liz. Liz will know what to do. So I felt like I should have been a lactation consultant by the time I was done being a nurse and a nurse practitioner, because so many of my patients would come in, they couldn't afford to see a lactation consultant. And I'm like trying to troubleshoot with them, right? In my office, sobbing, like latching people on. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? What is my life? But I actually liked that a lot. I think we can do a lot better with education surrounding that. And I really loved it when my patients would come in postpartum. I would warn of that ahead of time. If like you have any issues postpartum, as soon as that baby's out, I'm not scared of you again anymore. But when that baby's inside, you scare me. When it comes out, please come in. I have been through a lot. Let's go through it. Nurse Scott said, are they repeating it that it's normative in hopes that it makes it normative? I guess so. They're just wrong. They're wrong, Scott. They're wrong. I know you're trying to rein me in. Nurse Scott is my voice of reason usually on these lives. He tries to rein me back in, but I'm like, no, I refuse. Let me see. We're going to have some elevator music brought to you by caffeine. Veronica said, I feel like I've had to defend my breastfeeding journey recently as I'm still nursing my 13-month-old. Several people have questioned, which is ridiculous. Like, that's the other side of like, this article really could have just been summed up as, you do you, friend. You do you. You're doing great, period. Support people where they need help. We could have ended things. You're doing a great job. You feed that baby. Like I said, nursed mine forever and a day because she could not tolerate any other milk. She was over it. She never liked it. I was going to say like over it at one, but no, she never liked breastfeeding, but she had to. We tried every type of formula. And the girl didn't do terribly well with it. And then she like tolerated it, but didn't like love eating. Piper, on the other hand, a boob monster. But so I totally understand breastfeeding them for a long time. Let me see. And some people love it. Caleb Forth. Yes, Caleb. 2 years. 2 years is a really long time, especially after you've been pregnant. Like, Mama Nurse was talking in the very beginning about how she was, what did you say? You were like pregnant and breastfeeding for like 5 years or something with your kids. And I've heard that a ton. I realized this is the first summer in 5 years that I'm not pregnant or breastfeeding. And so I can wear dresses, because you can't really wear dresses when you're breastfeeding. I mean, you can, but like I liked more shirts. So then you can just like pick it up and kind of like do your thing. But I can wear dresses because people like weren't as thrilled if I wore a dress and I hiked my whole dress up to get my boob out, but this seemed fine. I laughed at the idea of self-teaching supplemental nursing systems. Literally, I was Googling. They handed me that. So a supplemental nursing system is like a tube, like a cylinder, and then it has a little tube that comes out of it, and you stick the tube. So you pump, and then you pour the breast milk into it, and then you tape the tube to your boob, and then you stick the baby on and hope that they'll get the milk from the tube that's dripping out and suck, which is then going to teach them how to eat. And I had to YouTube that myself because the nurse just handed it to me and I was like, I don't know what to do with this. She was like, I think they have a video about it on the internet. And I was like, okay, this is gonna be fine. I'm sure it's gonna be fine. It was not fine. Spoilers, it was not fine. Mama Nurse says, yep, our children are stair steps. So I was breastfeeding for 5 years straight. You are a rock star. Hang on one moment. I am getting input. What should we call my sister? We need names for her. She's the helper of my stream. She runs my life in fields in law tube, which I'm trying to emulate. I'm trying to bring it to nurse tube. They call them their co-counsel. So we need something. So what are you? My first assist? We'll call you my first assist. Chat. Let us know what other title we should give Rachel, who runs my life. But she's messaging me and I can't talk and read at the same time. So please pause. and just give us some ideas of what we can call her. Let me see. No. Okay. So she said Piper's Hospital would have done, what would Piper's Hospital have done if she went through the same as Avery and you didn't have formula? They told me it. So Piper, they didn't have any formula. You had to like bring your own. If it was a medical necessity, like they deemed it medically necessary, then they would give you formula, if that makes sense. So but if it was just you not wanting to breastfeed, then they would not. So that's a bummer. No need to apologize. First assist. You did well. No need to apologize. Hell, dad could use that feeding technique. I actually suggested that to Joe and he was not into it. We have the name producer. My work wife. See, we could call her my work wife, but she's my sister. And I feel like that just sends some interesting vibes. It's a good idea though. I like it. I do like it. Caleb said, I can't even imagine you all women are effing beasts. I can't imagine how you tolerate being pregnant, let alone everything else. Not well. Not well. Not well. Some of us handle it better than others. Avery asked me yesterday, she's like, when are we getting a new baby? I was like a baby doll? She's like, no, like in your belly. I was like, never. She's like, why? I was like, because being pregnant is the worst. And then you are babies and babies are a lot. And she was like, oh, but I want one. I was like, well, then you grow up and in 30 years, make one. Good luck. Karen Olson said, so they didn't try to push it on you at the hospital. Oh, good. Mama nurse, they're talking. We'll go on. Mama nurse said she never pressured to choose either, but that was just my journey. Nurse Scott said, I'm not disagreeing with you, but what I'm getting is breastfeeding is very good, but there are other considerations and we should never make patients feel ashamed. Exactly. It's just the subconscious like culture of it. I think that says like, oh yeah, like this is still the best. Like, I guess you can do this other thing if you can't. And there's a very inherent like guilt that you feel when your body is technically capable of doing something, but you are just over it. And we don't really value a lot of the times when I've found parents say, hey, I don't want to do this because I'm over it. You know what I mean? Like, I know there is a choice that would technically on paper be best for my kid, but I'm going to value my kid having a mentally healthy parent here and doing what's best for me. That's not like super pushed. Megan, a messenger, said, I exclusively pumped from birth to 11 months with my daughter by choice. At the hospital, they gave me donor milk until my milk came in. They pushed a little bit to physically breastfeed. First of all, massive kudos on pumping for 11 months, guys. If you ever have someone who has pumped for that long, you should just send them a hug or a coffee or their beverage of choice, whatever they would like, because pumping is so hard. There are so many parts to clean. I just pumped at work and there was so much to clean. Pumping is it's a lot of work. That's so much time hooked up to like a cow. You feel like a cow to this machine that is just like milking you. It's so much work. So much to clean. And then you still have to feed the baby, at least with breastfeeding. Once you get the hang of it and things are okay. I mean, all you have to do, there's very few dishes except for the ones of, all the food that you're eating and stacking on your baby. It's rough. So if you have exclusively pumping parents, massive props. Megan said, I had extreme anxiety when she would go to breast, so I couldn't handle it. This is a real thing. I'm glad you did that for you. I'm glad you like took a step back and said, hey, I'm just going to pump instead. This is, I forget what the terminology is now. And I had it occasionally where you have horrendous anxiety, like panic when they first latch on. And for some people, like they are like, no, I need to do this a different way. Other people, they're like, I'm not going to do this at all. But this is very, very real. So if you experience this or like intense depression when they latch, know that you're not losing your marbles, my friend. This is like a very normal, it's a physiologic thing. And it is okay to like stop if you need to completely, because it'll happen sometimes when you're pumping too. I actually had it with pumping more than with actual breastfeeding, but when they were cluster feeding, I had horrible anxiety sometimes when they needed to latch, and it didn't always get better. in like the near future, like at all. First assist, I appreciate that. Oh, someone said it. Dysphoric milk ejection. That's what I think. Dysphoric something. Yes. Like it is a real thing. So if your patients ever tell you that, if you ever feel it, I used to think I was like, man, I am like, that was one more thing. Cause then you're anxious and you're like, oh, I'm not doing a good job. And now I'm having, all these thoughts when I have to like latch her. And then I'm so anxious. It is real. It is real. It is very valid. Let me see. Thomas Brown says, sending virtual hugs to everyone who is breastfed. Yes. And who hasn't? Whoever, just virtual hugs to everyone, friends. We need them. It has been something. I'm the work sister wife. Wow. Now things are getting very, very interesting. What about the second opinion? Would you like to be the second opinion? Rachel would like to be the first opinion, the only opinion. That's all. Looking. Sorry, I say a lot. Everyone keeps commenting on all my videos that I say a lot. I do. It's a feature. I'm going to stop apologizing for it and just say I've tried to stop it, but now it's just going to go into the category of my personality quirks that most people hate. We're going to start calling them features. We do that with so this is a slight tangent. It has a point, I promise. My mom had a Honda Pilot, and every time you walked away from it, it beeped. Even if it was like that beep that your car makes when you're walking away with like the key fob that keeps the car on, and it goes beep, 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 beep. When you walk away, and usually it's telling you like, oh, hey, if you walk any further, the engine is going to turn off. But my mom's car did this even when everything was fine and you would walk away, it would beep no matter what, just to let you know that you were leaving the car. I don't know if they did that as like, hey, don't forget your kids in the car or whatever, but she tried to have it turn off because it's very alarming. And they said it was a feature, not a problem. They're like, everyone comes in and complains about this, but this is actually a feature of the car. So ever since then, I have our family motto, yes, is it's not a problem. It's a feature. So one of my fun features of my personality is, my inability to chill, my complete brain ADHD features of being all over the place, and that I say a lot. We're just going to embrace it. Cash RN says, I'm pumping as you speak, 10 months exclusively pumping twins. I just hit 130 gallons. I don't know what we could send you that would tell you you're awesome, but you're amazing. For one, having twins. Being pregnant with twins. You're probably pregnant with twins, which is phenomenal. And I don't know how you did it. Just having one at a time I don't even know how you did it. You're making it through twins as babies for 10 months and you've pumped 130 gallons of milk. That is so much milk. So massive congratulations. That is very, very impressive. And I hope they put that on all of their college applications. Nurse Scott says, I've never made 130 gallons of anything and my brain is going to a different place. We're just going to move on. I was like, are you sure? We're going to move on. We're going to have to call these late night lives something else because late night Liz cannot keep things absolutely fine. Let me see. Good. Okay, good. We're all caught up. All right, friends. Those are my thoughts. I appreciate your thoughts. I hope if you are someone that has been looking into breastfeeding, has being told you have to breastfeed, that you realize that you have other options, that your mental health and your physical health are just as important. And you're going to be a better parent if you are able to better take care of yourself. So take care of you. That is really what the baby in the end needs, is a happy, healthy parent. If you guys, I'm trying to set up a schedule for these YouTube lives so that they can be a little bit more predictable. I'm thinking Tuesday nights around 8:30 Eastern time, and then late night Liz. That's a good title for it. So if you want, Tuesday will probably be late night Liz. That'll be its thing. And Thursdays will be PC Liz at 3 p.m. At usually like 3 p.m. ish Eastern. So if you're looking for some kind of my first assist tells me I need stability in my life because my brain works like a ping pong ball going like beep, 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 that other people would apparently like stability. So we will have some stability. Um, and so that's kind of what we're looking at. And then like sit down pre-recorded videos probably on Saturday. So if you enjoying late night Liz, yes, LNL, perfect. We'll have to make some intros for it. So that's the tentative schedule going forward. If you are interested in catching those, this is where we will be. And yeah, make sure to do all the things that please the YouTube gods. We can increase the vital signs of the video by liking, leaving comments, and subscribing. That tells the internet that other people should watch this, essentially, which makes me happy. And it also makes my first assist happy because she likes looking at analytics. She's all the time. She's like, "What? How are things performing?" I'm like, "Girl, I don't know." She's like, "How long did you have a YouTube channel before you looked at the analytics?" I was like, 4 years. I make what I want. I rant about what I want. The people, they're used to it. It's fine. I do very much appreciate all of you being here. But I do love LNL. Yes. Scott, we'll probably have a panel discussion on Thursday. I forget what the topic was. I was brainstorming it. But we can intersperse a little bit of this in there. Tomorrow I am doing a full, like my actual work day. Rachel said, let's not even talk about how she recorded her financials on sticky notes. Yes. Nurse Scott, we could do, I forget did I have anything planned for Thursday? I don't remember. If not, we can do a medical perspective of abortion. That sounds totally fine. As long as I can find enough people to moderate it, because I do just want people to be in here for that. And I have not found anyone to represent the pro-life side. So if you're watching this and you want to join a random YouTube live, where we kind of talk about, from a medical perspective, different medical providers' thoughts surrounding the overturning of Roe versus Wade, you are more than welcome to come and join. I do have a more formal video coming out about that, but I've had to redo it a few times. So let me know. Nurse Corky, email me. I could call my mom. I know I could call my mom too. I just don't want to fight with her on the internet. We've agreed to just not talk about these things. But yeah, I do want to have that conversation. We'll have a more sit down one that's going to be more of just like gaining different perspectives and saying, like, I feel like the conversation has gotten so divided. And it's easy to think like, oh, how could this group think this way? And I have been in both camps of being very pro-life, now very pro-choice. And so I'm going to try to just make it presented in a way that just share the different perspectives of like, hey, this is, the other people aren't like, it's easy to just be like, oh, you're so ignorant, but like, this is what they're kind of where they're coming from. So we can hopefully have a conversation is. And Nurse Scott said, yeah, really the thing is what do we do with our patients? So this would be much more post-Roe, like how are we taking care of patients in like legally now? So this is not like, is it right? Is it wrong? This is much more like, hey, but I thought it would just be helpful to have someone who was coming in it from, I think it's a mild like a catastrophe. I always want to present things in a more like fair way. I don't want this to just be, as much as I say I want it to be the Liz show with all of my opinions, I do want people with opinions that are not in my echo chamber to be able to be here. So that's kind of why I wanted someone else just to like be on that fence with us. Okay, friends, I very much appreciate all of you being here. I'm going to go crochet, making a baby blanket. You want to see it? I'm going to force you to see it with me. But I need to start hustling on it because the baby shower is soon. So I'm going to go crochet a few lines of that. Hope my coffee wears off because goodness, I chugged a lot of it right before this and it just hit me and I'm like, hey. Here we go. Yesterday we pulled down 4 trees from our yard. So my body is exhausted, but my brain is not. All right. This has been a very Midwest goodbye. I'm very good at those. It's another feature. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you so much for sharing some of your time with me. I hope you always remember that you are more than enough. You, my friend, are not alone and you can do hard things. I'll see you next time. Bye. Let's pull in the outro. Oh, thanks for being a channel member. To these people, you're the best. You're the bomb. I appreciate you. There's more people that I haven't updated on here. I blame my first assist. That's her job. We might have to fire her, except I can't fire her because I probably can't get anyone else to deal with me. So it is what it is. All right. See you next time, friends. Bye.